computer starting right now.
Okay.
We're kind of
Roz,
debating
I
it
invited
at the time,
Rebecca.
if we should do the evening or, but on a day like today, it's so nice that, who knows?
But we'll post it on our Southeast Rochester Catholic YouTube page. Once I have to switch it into a link or something. I don't know what it's called, but I'll do that and we'll post it. The Voices of Women came out pretty well, didn't you think, Roz?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
I'm doing this for the Universalist Unitarian Church at the end of the month.
Oh, good.
Oh,
They do, what do they call it? Drop in and chat or something.
Is that the one right across the square downtown?
So we do rain.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm doing the Pittsburgh Women's Club on Thursday. There's a fourth one. I can't think.
Are you doing it for Sister Joan?
That was canceled, but she'll probably up it again. Yeah, we were gonna do St. Joe's.
I almost invited her today, but I thought, if you're going to do it for her, I won't. I didn't invite her.
Yeah.
There's Karen.
hi, Karen.
Karen? Hi, Karen. Oh, she's connecting to her audio.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, Karen made it. Good.
Took the day off just specially.
Did you? Good for you.
We were picking out our cemetery plot. Pretty exciting day.
Wow. Where are you going to be buried?
Well, the family has been at Whitehaven, but so Tom says they're free because there were 2 extra ones in the He's always trying to save $1. Do you know what I mean?
That's good. You can spend it
Now,
while
did
you're in.
you guys lay down in place to make sure you?
No,
you
but
know,
I was
you
thinking
looked
of
good
you.
there?
What?
You like the view?
No, but I was
Karen.
thinking of you because we went down south, the Cheshire for lunch and then came back. We were in the famous
nice.
Bloomfield.
Mm-hmm.
hmm
Okay, everyone. Well, why don't we start? Because it's 4 o'clock. There may be some other people that will join us. But I'm going to invite everybody to mute your screen. And I think Suzanne will tell us that if you want to ask a question or something, on your toolbar down below, you should see something that says reactions. So if you are looking, if you want to ask her a question, just press on that thumbs up. See how the thumbs up came in my screen? And then I'll flag you so that Suzanne can take your question. And when she says, okay, Kathleen, you know, what's your question? Then unmute yourself so that we can all hear your pearly words of wisdom. Okay? But in the meantime, everybody will mute. Okay, Amanda, if you go like, roll over yours, then your thumbs up will go down. Otherwise, you'll be talking. I forgot to say, Suzanne, welcome and thank you.
Now, you're gonna work this, are we gonna start the sharing now? This is how these crazy things all start. So I'm on the edge, or what are we gonna do? You're gonna.
Okay, so you go ahead, you can share your screen. So whenever you want, then our pictures will move out of your way and your screen will come up.
It says host disabled the participant. All right.
Oh, I thought I set it up differently when we practiced. See, this is how skilled we are. Hold on. Shoot.
Suzanne, my request is that you stay really close to your computer because you're not real easy to hear otherwise. Thanks.
Okay, Suzanne, try it and see if you can share.
I was in a Zoom where there was a presentation and I was able to make my screen show just the presentation and the speaker. And I don't remember when that came up.
Okay, once she goes to share it, your pictures will move to the side
Yeah.
and her screen will come up.
And then you can, if you want to, everybody else wants to take their pictures off and just see Suzanne.
It's really embarrassing because I didn't have it.
There you go.
Second. I'm
You're the
so
speaker.
sorry.
There's a way to do that. It comes
Up in
up.
the right-hand corner of your screen, it should say view with some
Oh, yeah.
dots.
Yeah.
So if you press that, if you check speaker view, then when Suzanne is speaking, you'll only see Suzanne. And once she shares the screen, we'll be able to see the PowerPoint that she's doing. And look we welcome Father John to our group. Blessed are you among women.
Yes.
I don't think, did that work, folks, or not?
Remember, nope, what you have to do is once you see the screen that you want to share, highlight it, then hit share screen.
We did this before and I don't know what I'm doing now. That's not working.
So Kathleen, you want her just to put her cursor on the application or the screen that she wants to show.
Yes. Are you you're in your screen, Suzanne, or are you looking at all of us still?
I'm still looking at you. Now there's my,
Okay, minimize all of us so that you can see your desktop. Then pick up the person. Okay, now we've got it.
Ah, there you go.
you do, okay, so I don't. Okay.
You did it perfectly. Father John, we talked about, Suzanne will take questions along the way. If you have something you want to say, if you go to the reaction button and do a thumbs up, then we'll call on you, okay?
Okay.
I really think it's only fair to start by telling everyone the dream I had last night.
Oh, perfect.
I dreamt, and Father John, this is so for you, that we were just getting going, but we didn't have screens. We were sitting outside the church, and a stagecoach pulled up with everybody from the parishes dressed in 19th century garb. And you, Father, were dressed as a woman in a long skirt and a big funny hat. And my husband said, do you want me to go home and get your long skirt? Because I did buy a long skirt for these, but it doesn't matter. So he went home, but you said, I'm not staying in this dress for all this time. So you took off your dress. So that's one way to begin. So, I titled the talk, Provocative Mothers and Their Precocious Daughters, Inspiring Our Children to Vote, because Roz and I particularly have talked more about making this broader than just mothers and daughters. Because while we are all children, we are not all parents, and we all have some role in affecting how people vote. And that's a little bit of the tone of today. This is the book, and I want to talk to you a few minutes about why I wrote the book. When I started teaching college, because I was the woman, they said, well, your slavery might be your expertise, but you have to teach women's history because you're a woman. So I had to teach it on the run. And I was not happy with the books that were available to teach women's history. So I wanted something very personal. So I thought doing it about their personal lives as well as the politics would be great. I have a friend who has 6 children, and she's an activist. She's been arrested 15 times. Some of you might know her. I'm not going to say her name, but she has 3 daughters and 3 sons. And I watched their interaction, and I realized that they did not become like her. Pardon me. Let me go back for a minute. They went and lived their own lives, and sometimes they became active with her, and sometimes they didn't. And I thought, gee, I wonder if women in the 19th century did that as well. Or did their mothers just say, okay, I'm an activist, you better be an activist? So I had a lot of assumptions when I went into this, and I learned a lot of things. Now I want to talk about the word provocative, because one of my friends said I should not use the word provocative because it means luring. But Susan B. Anthony was provocative, and this is what she was. She vexed, she stimulated, she exasperated, she annoyed, she challenged, and she angered. And that's what pretty much my women did. I call my women reform mothers, and I call their daughters reform daughters. This quickly is the layout of the women. This is in order of when they were born. Martha Coffin Wright was from Auburn. She went to the Seneca Falls Women's Rights Convention. Abby Kelly Foster was from Massachusetts. You probably don't know her. Elizabeth Cady Stanton from Seneca Falls, you all have heard of. Lucy Stone, many of you have heard of, I think. She was also from Boston. So I wanted to bring in a few cartoons here just to lighten this up and talk about how young children watch us when we vote and watch us when we make our decisions. And this young lady has watched her parents, and she's going to sort of be our little mascot here, watching us and listening to how we affect our children and how they affect us. So Martha Coffin Wright and Ellen Wright Garrison are the first team. I have 4 teams of women. I'm going to divide this up. And in order to try to make them stand out for you, I'm going to tell you something specific about their relationship. And if you are a child or if you are a parent, you may recognize some of their relationship characteristics. Martha and Ellen went from conflict to resolution. And I chose book covers to sort of help you remember what they were like. Let the Healing Begin was really Martha and Ellen's entire lives. They were always at each other's throat, and they really could have used this workbook, but in the end, they really could have written this workbook. Martha Coffin Wright, her years are right here, 1811 to 1875, was very active as an abolitionist long before she went to Seneca Falls for the Women's Rights Convention in 1848. She was a radical abolitionist, and she was one of the first women that joined the American Anti-Slavery Society, organized by William Lloyd Garrison. It was Martha's good luck that her daughter married William Lloyd Garrison's son, William Lloyd Garrison Jr., so that became a driving force for them. I like to remind everyone that these women were abolitionists before they were women's rights advocates, and they were all good friends of both Susan B. Anthony and Frederick Douglass. Had Frederick Douglass at her home frequently. She lived in Auburn, and Auburn was scandalized by the fact that he even came into town, much less came and spent the night at her house. Martha taught her children how to embrace the needs of African Americans. They sheltered slaves in their kitchen. They were members of the Underground Railroad, and they were really active in Auburn in many ways as women's and men's rights. This is the Seneca Falls statue. Some of you might have been to the Women's Rights National Park. And I like to highlight Martha. Martha is the tallest woman here, and Martha is 6 months pregnant in this picture. When Martha went to the Seneca Falls Convention, she was indeed 6 months pregnant, and it really wasn't appropriate for her to speak at all. She sat in a very back pew. You can see Frederick Douglass there, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton is the short woman with the curly hair. And the other women are people that we don't know. And it's interesting, I think, that there's a woman that has her children with them. This is the beginning. Martha's children did not come with her, but a lot of women came with their children, and men came with their children to impress their kids about voting and about the rights that they thought they should be winning, or at least fighting for. This is Martha and Ellen. Ellen was born in 1840. Martha was the oldest mother of all. Well, actually, she wasn't the oldest mother. She was 39 when she had Martha. Elizabeth Cady Stanton was 41 when she had her daughter, but it was her sixth child. So Ellen was the third daughter of Martha. Martha had a period in between Ellen and her son where she wasn't getting pregnant at all. So Ellen was like the bonus and the wonderful surprise and great joy of the family. Martha was married to David Wright, who was a lawyer, and his office was right down the street in Auburn, New York. The house doesn't exist today. But Martha and Ellen had, as I said, a very contradictory personality. Martha, in short, was a boss, and she drove poor Ellen absolutely crazy. The great joy that I had was discovering the letters between Martha and Ellen, and Martha never lets it alone. Martha criticizes her for every single thing that she does. She sent her off to boarding school, and she criticized her handwriting. There were too many flourishes. Her spelling, she would give exact examples of all the words she spelled wrong. When she didn't do well in her piano recitals, she criticized her for that. When she tore her clothing, she criticized her. And half the time she sent her to boarding school with clothes that were too old, too small, and already in great disrepair. So Ellen took to jumping off of trees so she would dirty her clothes and wouldn't have to wear them and could get new things. So they had this really quite feisty relationship. I'm going to quote, this is what Martha said to her mother in 1855. Martha was 15. "You write such lectury letters always," she told her mother. Well, Martha was annoyed and she said, "So you think my letters are too lectury? Well, I'm going to not write any more like that." But then she just proceeded to give her more advice. She gave her daughter a lot of advice about how to be a good friend. She said, "Pursue an unselfish course. Resolve not to magnify your little trifles into importance in order to be happy at school. When the older girls don't want to play with you, they don't want to associate with you, cultivate an amiable, pleasant disposition, which would attract them to you again when they're ready to be your friends." They ended up having a relationship that I hoped, and this is what my hope was all through the book. Mothers are going to say to their daughters, "There's a women's rights convention. It's in Rochester. Get on a train and go there." But they did not do that. Martha realized that the only reason Ellen wanted to go to a women's rights convention because she had a crush on one of the reverends, one of the ministers. And this minister was a very inappropriate minister because when he did meet Ellen at the women's rights convention, Ellen was 15. He was more than twice her age. They went on romantic walks together. And this is what Martha told Ellen: "You should remember that you are no longer a little girl, and any admiration that you should express for a man many years your senior could be misconstrued." Martha did not allow Ellen to go to women's rights conventions for 3 more years. Her primary concern was that Ellen be a moral young lady and behave well. And also, this is very interesting and very delicate. All the abolitionists wanted to think that they had blind eyes when it came to interracial relationships. So Ellen, who was quite a flirt, started spending time with a young African-American man named Robert Purvis Jr. And she would write to her mother, as we can imagine writing to our mothers when we were in college, like daring them to let us be friends with somebody that they weren't quite sure that we should be friends with. And she said, "I've gone horseback riding with Robert, and I really am getting to love Robert more than you would want me to." So Martha, as a good abolitionist, and all the abolitionists were just like this, really had to figure out what to say as a good advice. I mean, how should she temper her comments? But really, it was not an era that you could have an interracial marriage and get along very well with your neighbors. So this was a very interesting an interesting game they were playing, really. This is Ellen when she's a little older than 15. Ellen became more attuned to her mom once the Civil War began because they both shared concerns for the war. Her brother and Martha's son was injured at Gettysburg, and it bonded them. And then once Ellen met her husband, William Lloyd Garrison Jr., and they got married in 1864, while the war was still going, Martha and Ellen became finally closer and had more in common. And Martha, she never stopped criticizing her. When Ellen had a baby and the baby wasn't walking, Martha insisted that she coat her legs with salt. And when the salt would dry, then it would make them firmer so her daughter could make the baby walk. So she gave her odd pieces of advice like this. So it was sort of amusing. It was really a treat to run into little quotes like this. So their relationship improved. And this is a picture of Ellen with her youngest daughter, Agnes, and this is William Lloyd Garrison's son, Will. This is Agnes, Will, and Ellen. And Ellen would go on to have 4 more children. And this little girl, Agnes, and Eleanor, 2 of her daughters, never married. And Eleanor kind of carried on the flag or the great passion of Martha for the suffrage, because Ellen herself, during her busy years of being a mother of 5 and a wife and carrying on a household, was very uninvolved with the suffrage movement. But by the time she was about 50, she reconnected. She became friends again with Susan B. Anthony, and she and her sister Eliza went to lots of the conventions, and she became a life member of the National American Women's Suffrage Association. She inspired her daughter Eleanor to join the New York Suffrage Association, and Eleanor became one of the big workers for Carrie Chapman Catt. So that's, in a way, how I like to see Ellen holding her own and saying, Mom, this is what I'm going to do, and this is not what I'm going to do. And so that conflict closed, but Ellen definitely said, I'm learning this from you. I'm choosing this. You taught me how to be a great housewife. You taught me how to be a great mom. You taught me how to be a great cook. And yes, I am in favor of women's suffrage, but I'm not going to do it the way you did it. And that was true of all the women. This is a little cartoon I found, and I think it's kind of funny because it's all the women are dressed in the 1920s style when we did get the vote, but this is a modern depiction of it. And I sort of look upon this as Eleanor, who would have looked like this when she was fighting for the vote, and she was Martha's granddaughter. We'll find this pattern that many times the granddaughters carry on the great passion of their grandmothers, whereas the mothers sort of hold off a little bit on being very activist. Abby Kelly Foster and Olive Foster are the second team of mother-daughters. They were very different. The book title that I chose for them is called Postcards from a Stranger. The first 12 years of Olive Foster's life, she saw her mother perhaps a total of 24 months. Let me tell you a little bit about Abby. Abby, this is not a great picture of her, but Abby was one of the most gorgeous abolitionists. And Abby, I'd like to say really Abby was provocative, but she was not a flirt. She provoked the people that she was speaking to in a very, very non-traditional way. She was speaking to crowds of men and women gathered together. Now, this was called a promiscuous audience because there were men and women together. And it was so outlandish for her to be talking to them. And this is like 1840, 1843, 1844, that they threw pepper at the furnaces so it smelled. They turned out the lights. They threw bricks at her. They threw rotten fruit at her. They threw rotten eggs at her. And she loved it. This just made her go on even more so than she was before. So it really fired her up. She was really a very, very outspoken abolitionist. And then she married another outspoken abolitionist, Stephen Foster. Not the singer, Stephen Foster became her husband. So Abby Kelly Foster and Stephen Foster. And it's kind of interesting. I think Abby really resisted his proposal for 4 years because she was only wedded to abolitionism. But when she finally married and then had Alla, her baby, this is Alla a little older, she went right back out on the lecture circuit. She weaned her child early. Her friends were scandalized. And she said, I need to save slave children. My daughter will survive. She will always know I am her mother. And it's, I think one of my friends that was reading this book said that her very favorite quote in the whole book was this. This is Abby speaking about motherhood. The most precious legacy I can leave my child is a free country. And what she meant, of course, was no slavery. And her daughter later said, when she was in her 20s and writing a memoir, had my mother been less noble, less brave, and less tender of her child, meaning me, she would have remained at home to enjoy her motherhood at the expense of other mothers, meaning other slave mothers. So Abby certainly didn't do this like saying, I'm off and I'll see you in 10 years. It wrenched her. This is the woman and daughter that were the most separated of all 4 teams. It just got her in the gut, you know, that she did it, but she just felt she had to do it. Abby again said, to leave my daughter at home, I should be violating a trust that God has committed to my care. But she said that when a little, not a huge tragedy, but a minor tragedy happened to Alla when she was about 10. She developed severe scoliosis. And some of you may remember in the old days, they lined us all up and they looked at our back to see if we had a crooked back or not. And if I don't know what happened to the kids that got their crooked backs, but Alla's was tragically crooked. And so she had to wear a back brace for 10 years. And each year she had to have a new brace put on and then tightened. It was almost like teeth braces to make her stand up straight. And Abby took the first 2 years of Alla's brace wearing, left the abolitionist lecture circuit, and came home to take care of Alla. So she really, really showed that when she felt no one else could replace her, she was there for Alla. But then after Alla got better and Alla was well enough to go to college, Abby was back off on the road herself. So this is a very interesting, that's why I call this Postcards from a Stranger. They had an amazingly good relationship when you think of what they went through. Alla went to Vassar College, and she went there the third year that it opened. It opened in 1865, and she began in 1868. I call these young girls precocious because, boy, were they precocious. There was no high school for girls. Alla was from Worcester, Massachusetts. There was no high school whatsoever. She only got as far as grade school, barely was able to do math. Reading was pretty good, writing was pretty good. So she taught herself and her father taught her. Some of you may be wondering, well, if Abby was on the road, who took care of Alla? Stephen came home and took care of her lots of times. I mean, he was a great model for a father. And he put her in the care of one of his cousins who took care of her. And she was very independent. She really had a great confidence. And she got to Vassar. And again, some of you who read about college at all in the early days, you might think that these women's colleges were the most radical places to be in the world. Well, they were not, because this is where Matthew Vassar, who ironically got all this money by being a brewery, he ran a brewery. He believed that these girls needed protection. He didn't believe, he was against the woman's vote. He was against any liberal ideas whatsoever. Those girls were there, almost like being in a convent, I guess. They were really there to be sure they didn't get in trouble and to be sure they didn't go anywhere, but just got smart. They weren't allowed to take history. They weren't allowed to take economics. They took literature and they took not even a little bit of science. But then Matthew Vassar was very smart here. He hired one of the best woman physicists in the world. Her name was Mariah Mitchell. I'm going to talk about her more when I talk about Harriet Stanton Blatch, who also went to Vassar College. But Alla did well at Vassar. She was brilliant. But her mother was hoping all the time that Alla would get in trouble, that she would raise, all of a sudden she said, this girl is she's gonna be like me. She's gonna be upset about something. So I want to quote from you. They when Alla was there was a crisis on the campus, and the Easter vacation was shortened by one day, and all the students thought, oh my gosh, this is going to change our whole lives. We're gonna revolt over this. So they did a very mild little revolt, and Abby was very excited, and she wrote to Alla. She said, aren't you going to get involved with this revolt? She said, I'm not going to get involved with this. This is not an important revolt at all. But when the lady principal, who none of them could stand, she tragically died, and they were all told they had to wear black for a month. And that's when Alla stood up and said, there's no way I'm going to be wearing black. So then Abby got really excited, and she said, oh my gosh, I am really, we're gonna keep on going from here. But then Abby said, Alla, when you come home, we're going to start really getting going on your activism. And this is what Alla said. Mom, I am so proud of you and Father. You are so devoted. You have so much strength, and you do all of this reform. I think I could not stand the trial. I'm sure I shall never do anything half as useful as you, she said. The children of good people and great people are apt to be ugly or forceless. And I think that you and I should be glad that I'm not any worse. And that was the end of it. She was not going to be getting involved. She went off to become a school teacher. She taught young girls in Boston for her entire life. She was a wonderful role model. She taught mostly poor children, city children that were in Boston, immigrants. And then she became very interested in forming a lodge that she bought a little bit of land in New Hampshire. She bought this little bit of a lodge, and she turned it into a hotel so she could train these young girls how to serve people and how to learn how to be employed. While she was there, she traded roles with her mom. This is a picnic that's at Lucy Stone's house. But I want the woman who's got the white shawl on right in the middle. This is the only picture we have of Abby between the ages of 50, and here she's 80. And she decided to wear the shawl because she didn't want anyone to notice her. But if you kind of look at the picture, she's the most noticeable. Her daughter is standing right behind her. And her daughter Alla was always a little bit stooped because of her scoliosis. But mother and daughter changed roles here. Alla became the boss of her mother because her mother didn't have any social graces. So she lived in a boarding house, and she used to brush her teeth in the middle of the parlor and pick her teeth and do other things that she should not do. And her daughter had to teach her how, in a way, to become a member of a boarding house, living in a boarding house. And they traveled together, and they ended up having a nice relationship. And Alla did not maybe be the woman that Abby dreamed of for her, but as in all of these relationships, she learned a lot from her mother. And in the end, she did something that was kind of ironic. And I have a little picture here of inspiring kids to vote. Besides inspiring her own students to vote, Alla did a kind of a cool thing. There was a little town in New Hampshire called Sandwich, New Hampshire. And Alla, while she was in her 50s, organized with the town and established the Vote for Women in Sandwich, New Hampshire. This is how she chose to carry on her mother's legacy. Was it the way her mother wanted her to? Maybe yes, maybe not. But again, this was Alla, who never married, and her mother was just absolutely fine with that, said, so this is how I'm going to carry on your legacy. So the third team of women, mother and daughter, is Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Harriet Stanton Blatch. This is like Helicopter Mom. This is a dependence that they both denied. And the book that I chose for this is Too Close for Comfort, Questioning the Intimacy of Today's New Mother-Daughter Relationship. Elizabeth Cady Stanton stayed at home with Harriet until she went off to college. So she, along with Susan B. Anthony, literally worked out of her kitchen. So let me tell you a tiny bit about her background. I know most of you know a lot about Elizabeth Cady Stanton, but she was an abolitionist first, and she is one of the most poorly quoted women's rights leaders we have, because she definitely was racist, and she said terrible things to Frederick Douglass, and she said terrible things when African Americans men were going to get the vote before the women. And she said that she and Susan B. Anthony were very, very angry, and they said that they should get the vote first. They were white, they were educated, and freed slave men should not get the vote before them. So this became a real problem. However, Elizabeth Cady Stanton was great friends with Frederick Douglass for their first 40 years easily. She was an abolitionist first, and she became a women's rights leader after she fought for temperance and for young girls' education and for the end of slavery. She had Harriet. Harriet was her sixth child. She was 41 years old, and she was bushed. She was ready to call it quits. But so in those days, no one used birth control. And matter of fact, all the women in this era, women that were married and single, and women of all stripes, of all religions, anybody who was an activist in the 19th century, historians have told us, opposed birth control and opposed abortion, because they said it abused women, and it was bad for women's health. So Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who did not live for many months at a time with her husband, had 7 children. And when she had Harriet, at first she said, oh, I have to give up my career. But as soon as she saw Harriet, of course, she fell right in love with Harriet. And she said, well, I'll just have to wait a little. Susan B. Anthony, you'll have to wait a little bit until I'm ready to get back on the road. So as I told you, they had a very tight relationship, but they denied having this dependence on each other. They did, even school-wise, Harriet did not go away to school for a long time. I mean, the other girls had experience going away to school. Harriet was at home with her mom until her mom tried to get her to go to a boarding school, and Harriet got on her horse, and they had horses. They were not poor, these women. They were white middle-class women. So let me make that clear. They were not deprived in many ways. They were not. And so she had a horse at school with her, and she ran away and came home on the horse. So she couldn't get her to stay in boarding school. She wanted to be with her mommy. And until she went to college, she was. This is Harriet. This is a little bit distorted. Harriet was stunning. She was really a lovely, lovely woman. And she went off to Vassar as well. She went to Vassar 6 years after Allah. And so she did not want to go to Vassar because she knew what Vassar was. It was a regressive, protective school that didn't let the women do anything. It was against the suffrage, and it would have been far better for her, she felt, if she went to Cornell, which was co-ed. You're going to get a much better education at Cornell. She could not have economics, political science, or history until she did it with independent study with the professor. What Harriet did discover is that she was a brilliant scientist. While she was at Vassar, she became one of Mariah Mitchell's best students. Matter of fact, Mariah Mitchell told Susan B. Anthony Harriet Stanton was her best student. She became enamored with the heavenly bodies, and she loved to see any display of that. And her parents really discouraged this tremendously for her. And so she just kind of put up with this. But interestingly, I want to read you a quote as Harriet became more willing to separate from her mother became much needier of Harriet. So imagine if you were the daughter of a mother who said this, or you if the mother of any parent or any child, what you would feel if your child said this to you. I'm sorry that I lost the quote. Now this is Elizabeth, feisty Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who doesn't need anybody, writing to Harriet at college. Take care of yourself for my sake. So in my old age, you might be a comfort and support instead of an added load for me to carry. I have made up my mind, Harriet, that I'm going to stick to you henceforth like a burr. This is her daughter who's getting ready to graduate college. So Harriet's answer to this was to move to Germany because she was having none of this. So this was a dependence she was denying. She was out of there. So the separation was good for both Harriet and Elizabeth because Harriet proved that she could leave her mother and Elizabeth proved that she could sort of survive without her daughter. She invited Harriet to please come home and help her finish writing The History of Women's Suffrage. And on the way home, Harriet met Harry Blatch on the ship. And so they fell in love and they got married, and Harriet lived in England for 20 years. So Elizabeth was really in bad shape then. She really could not depend on her daughter that much anymore. So this is the picture. This is one of the most familiar images you have of Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Yes, she was enormously overweight. She was probably way over 300 pounds, but she had these lovely white silver curls that she was very proud of. Harriet, as you can see, is quite a lovely young woman. This is their daughter, Nora. And I won't go into this too much right now, but you can read the book to see what happened to her other daughter. It's really Harriet was the kind of mother her mother was when she just left the kids on her own. Harriet became very steely as a mother. And as a grandmother, Elizabeth Cady Stanton became soft. So she was called the Queen Mother. Her granddaughters and sons adored her. And for those of you that have grandchildren, you may know that if you have them in town, it's really great. But if they're in another country and you get to visit for maybe a month or 2 or 3. And so Harriet got to visit for a month, 2, 3, sometimes even a year. She was very, very, very close to her grandchildren. This young woman, Nora, will go on to be like Martha's granddaughter. She will go on to be the person who helped her mother organize the suffrage parade. Nora graduated from Cornell as the first engineering student. So she, in a sense, became what her mother wanted her to be and became what her grandmother wanted her to be. So it's very interesting to look at the intergenerational patterns that are going on. They're not happening exactly as you wished, but they're definitely happening. And I think it's a good lesson for all of us. If we're teaching or if we're preaching or if we're even having a cup of coffee with somebody and we're talking about the election or we're talking about what we wished for our country or for us, our listeners might not look like they're listening. But I think that we all have some wise things to say. And all of these moms had some very wise things to say to their children and to their grandchildren. And they were heard, even if they weren't sure if they were heard. I love this photo because this is intergenerational activity at the suffrage parade. This Harriet Stanton Blatch's claim to fame was organizing these parades. As I said, her daughter, Nora, took over the job when Harriet stopped doing it. But this is a good example of, this is in New York City. It was probably 1914. The women by this time are all dressed in white, and many of them are bringing their children, and they're bringing their children either if they're walking or if they're in carriages. And are they imposing? We see a lot of kids in in demonstrations today. And some of my friends say they shouldn't be there, but I think it's something these little kids remembered. And this is what Harriet and her daughter did. And her daughter also had daughters. So now we go on to the last team, and this is Lucy Stone and Alice Stone Blackwell. The book cover that I chose for these two is a little different than the bond that Harriet and Elizabeth had. This mother-daughter team was a team. From the very beginning, they were bound in their goal of what they wanted. Alice Stone Blackwell, of all the four daughters, was the easiest for Lucy to persuade to come her way. And matter of fact, Lucy was the editor of the Woman's Journal and just assumed that her daughter Alice would take over that job. But let me tell you a little bit about Lucy. Lucy Stone was from Worcester, Massachusetts, just like Abby Kelly Foster. She also resisted marriage for a very long time. Henry Blackwell begged her to marry him, and finally, after 4 years, she agreed. But she had some pretty strict rules around it. She was going to lead her own life. She was going to continue to be an abolitionist, and she was going to keep her name. The women in history who kept their name before it was okay to do so were called Lucy Stoners. And she was the first of many women, at least women who were well known, who insisted on keeping her name. She didn't add his name as a hyphenated name. She was Lucy Stone. She was the only woman among the Reform mothers who went to college. She went to Oberlin. She did pay for it by herself. Her brothers were all sent to college by their father without needing pay. But Lucy taught school to make enough money to go to Oberlin. She didn't start till she was 25 because it took her that many years to make money to go to school. She was another very provocative speaker. Provocative meaning she made you mad. So she, like Abby, would stand in front of a promiscuous audience. That means there were men and women, both were there together. And she also was the recipient of rotten eggs and terrible comments and lots of nasty things thrown at her. She was a little less feisty than Abby, but what she learned, she started talking about abolition because she too was a radical abolitionist with many African American friends. And she started speaking about abolition. And when they threw things at her because she was a woman speaking to men and women together, she started speaking about women's rights. And that convinced her that women's rights were just as important as the ending of slavery. So she and Henry have one baby. They were quite a bit older. She was 39, and this is quite old in the 19th century. She had her baby when she was 39, and it was 1957. So Alice Stone Blackwell, notice how they incorporate both names, was their child. Lucy was the one mother among these four who just couldn't decide what to do. Should I go to work? Should I stay home? Should I go to work? Should I stay home? So she would go off and do a couple lectures, and she'd be so upset she'd come home. And she'd feel so guilty. And Alice was a little bit of a sickly child. So she needed her mom. Not as much as Alla did. She didn't have scoliosis. She had very bad eyesight. And she was just a little bit sickly. Once she went to boarding school, her mother felt more freedom to go off and start doing more talks again. They both lived through the Civil War in a very quiet way. Those were the days when if you had $300 and you didn't want to go fight, like her father, he did not go fight. So they were all sidelined in the Civil War, whereas Martha Coffin Wright, her son was in the war. So this was a little bit of a difference. This is Alice, probably at about 14. And this young lady was a woman's rights gal from the get-go. She went to her, it wasn't a boarding school, it was a day school. And she went in and she told these girls, all of whom were against suffrage. It was 1870, and the girls she went to school with made fun of her. They called her a suffrage crazy girl. That they said, well, you're not supposed to sew on Sunday, and you're not supposed to be a woman's rights advocate. And Alice said, well, that's too bad because I'm both of those things. So she had something in her from the very beginning that was not in the other girls, not even in Harriet. How do you explain it? There's no way to explain it really. But again, it's the fascination of looking at the parental relationship, I think. I use this picture of a young girl today because I think that's what Lucy Stone or Alice Stone would have been behaving like. She would have been getting her students to vote. She would have been maybe making a little bit of noise when they were a little hesitant. She would have been putting up posters and she would have been smiling while she did it. So I just love this thinking about Alice and how she just had a lot of vim. This is Alice when she was probably 40. And she also went to college by that time. You know, most of the girls were. She went to Boston University. She lived at home. But what her mother taught her was, I'm going to read just from one of the letters. This is my favorite quote. She said, now listen, this is back to something like Martha telling the girls how to behave. Dress neatly and go home early. So that it was very important to her that her daughter behave well, but it was also very important that she learn how to harvest peaches, make blackberry preserves, keep indoor plants healthy, evaluate how to hire help. And also that she should take care of her sensitive eyes. She should know how to get a veil to block her eyes from the sun. She should wear proper gloves, a cloak, hang up all of her clothes. Now, when Alice is 40, her mom is still telling her, Alice, you should wear a coat. I mean, some of us do this, I guess. You should wear gloves. You should wear a hat. And Alice has the disposition, not like Ellen. She just kind of, okay, mom, okay, mom, okay, mom. They work together as a wonderful team. But her mother called her Cubby, Cubby, well into her 40s. Her mother also left her. Lucy Stone made a fair amount of money she invested it in land before she met Henry, who could never keep a job and make money at all. And she also made a lot of money lecturing. These women made a fair amount of money on the lecture circuit. And so she left her home and all of her money to Alice. So Alice was in good shape for her whole life. Alice never married, and but this was just absolutely fine with her mother. And she, besides becoming the editor of the Woman's Journal, Alice herself went on to do a lot of international things. She became interested, it was right around the Armenian War with Turkey, and she became very interested in the plight of Armenians, and she did translating of Armenian poetry. And she almost reminded me of Eleanor Roosevelt. She even looks a little bit like Eleanor Roosevelt. She did a lot of things that were way beyond just the vote. This last picture of Alice, it's very hard to see which she is, but I describe her, she's sitting in the back of a carriage next to a woman we haven't talked about, but Antoinette Brown Blackwell is a suffragist that is from Henrietta, New York. And Alice here is 57 years old, and I describe her hat as wearing a salad bowl. And even though these women cared what they looked about, and here she was in the back car. This is a suffrage parade. She was interested in an advocate of suffrage all the way to the end. And she was able to vote because she was alive then. So I'm going to end with this little poster and read what I discovered about Reform Mothers. Reform mothers held simple goals for their daughters, not unlike the desires of all mothers in their eras. They hoped their daughters would learn how to achieve satisfaction, not only as their mothers had from reform and activism, but from acquiring skills to maintain their independence. They taught their daughters how to master basic housewifery, how to milk a cow, gather eggs, plant a vegetable garden, make bread, hire honest kitchen help, balance the books. Their young women should pursue education, friendships, love, and become mothers themselves only if they wished. If the reform mothers dipped into their mother's work and women's rights, this would be a bonus. It would be something extra. It was not expected. When Ellen Wright, Olive Foster, Harriet Stanton, and Alice Blackwell looked at their mothers' lives, they did not see reform mothers. Like all children, like us, they each viewed their mother as a source of creativity and inspiration. Then they determined how to shape their own life and fit it the way it suited them. Their mothers made it clear they never sought to reproduce themselves in their daughters. Martha, Abby, Elizabeth, and Lucy served not as reform mothers to their daughters, but simply as mothers. When reform mothers died, they left legacies of writing, statues, portraits, and achievements, all named for them. But they left so much more. They left the legacy of their reformed daughters who lived the dreams their provocative pioneer work made possible to achieve by these precocious women. Thank you. Hi, Shanti.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. That was great. Anybody have any questions or comments? Do not be fearful or timid to be the first one to ask a question. Father John?
Yeah, Suzanne, do you think some of the reason that these women could get involved was that they were middle class or upper middle class and had the resources, or?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. That would be part of it. They had I hate to say the leisure time, but they all had servants. I mean, in those days, you could have an Irish servant for $6 a month. So you really, yeah, and so even if Martha Wright's husband was a lawyer and they lived in a beautiful home in Auburn, Elizabeth Cady Stanton's husband was a lawyer and he was also a member of the legislature on and off. Henry Blackwell didn't make any money, but Lucy did. And one year, Elizabeth Cady Stanton made $8,000 in those, and you multiply it by about 20 for today, just lecturing. So they did have the means. They did have the means to, but so did all the other women that were with them. I mean, they could have chosen to do this or not chosen to do this.
Yeah.
Good point.
Okay. I'm trying to get this down.
When I did this in another Zoom, I think Roz, you said you'd like me to do more about connecting it to today. Is there anything in particular? Is Roz still there? Maybe Roz is not there anymore.
No, she's
I'm here.
Yeah.
I'm here. Suzanne, you did a good job of bringing in voting today, and the fact of the matter is that we're having women fill more positions in all levels of government. What would you think these women would have said if they were to look ahead and see what's happening with women serving in government as they are?
Well, I think this is specifically 19th century, the pioneers, the early women. I think first off, they would have been pretty discouraged that we didn't get the vote for 72 years. I mean, they really worked hard at doing this for a long, long, long time. One of the reasons Harriet Stanton Blatch left the parade stuff and went otherwise is when in 1915, the New York State Legislature voted no for women getting the vote. And for any of you that have watched any of the last couple of years up to 1920, it was just really dismal. So I think they'd be thrilled with almost anything. I hate to say it, Roz, but I think that they would be thrilled that this many women are involved, because they came from a situation where there was nothing. And I think they'd be more excited to see how many women were working for wages, although we all know the equality isn't where it might be. I think they'd be thrilled, certainly, that they're on juries. I mean, if they look at colleges, we all know that there's just as many, if not more, women at colleges. There's more women getting higher degrees. I think they'd see more advancement in education than in political office. Some people are always discouraged. I mean, you can look at a cup as half full or half empty, I guess. Maybe I'm being a little Pollyanna, which really I'm usually not, but I don't think it's gone backwards a lot. Certainly for African American women, it hasn't been is a straight line, and we are working at the scholarship there to really uncover a lot of what went on. But their great-granddaughters, their great-great-granddaughters maybe are seeing the results of some of what they did.
Mhm.
Often I talk about the fact that the mothers themselves made it possible for their daughters to do, for example, to stand up in front of a group and talk. Their daughters probably didn't realize that their mothers had suffered so much to make that happen. And I think today there's a lot of young women who are not interested in feminism because it's not appropriate, or it's not, I don't know what's the right word. It's not that it's not politically correct, but young girls in college don't see themselves as feminists, but they're more than happy to take advantage of what the women's movement has achieved for them. Although,
Right.
yeah. So.
Suzanne, I just have one comment. I have to run along, but I'm reading your book and I'm really loving it because it really kind of sets these women within sort of a context of normal life. I think sometimes when we do history, we tend to focus on the big moments and the everything that goes on with that. And this just showed that they were really just human beings, just living a life and facing many of the challenges that we face in our own lives in terms of illness and death and challenges and things like that, and trying to make decisions about educating children and all of that. And yet, as they did that, they were also engaged in this other important work. And I think sometimes we might discount the ability to do that because we're sort of tied up with all these other things, and yet they weaved it in and made it work. And I think it's kind of fascinating. I mean, just like the first pair that you talked about, where she's sort of nagging her daughter constantly. It's just funny to see that. And when you think about these women as such heroes. And so important in advancing things, but still, they were very human in terms of some of their interactions as well.
One of the things that I find both rewarding and sad, so many people say to me, "Oh, I love this book. It's not like regular history." I don't think we've done a good job at really making history human. Really, I mean, it's such a wonderful story. It's so rich. And let me give you if for those of you who can see Shanti in the pink sweater, Shanti is a good friend of mine who served as my research assistant for almost all of this book. So hi, good to see you. She chose the photos with me, and she transcribed a lot of the pictures or the letters, and we went through them together. And it's hard to read the writing. It's really hard to read the writing. So anyway, thank you, Father John. I appreciate that. Yeah,
I think Kathy Little has a question she'd like to ask.
No, I don't. No, I don't.
Oh, your hand is raised. I'm
Yes?
lowering your hand. There, I just lowered your hand.
Sorry about that.
So, well, thank you all so much.
It strikes me, Suzanne, that you are here speaking to a promiscuous audience as well. So that was good that Father John joined us so that you can count yourself right up there with
Promiscuous?
some of these wonderful people.
You know,
Promiscuous?
it was so shocking for people to have a woman speak. I used to tell my students, it's as if you were sitting in an adult meeting and a 4-year-old came in and said, I'm your speaker tonight. And people would just like, they wouldn't throw things at him probably, but they would just laugh him off the stage. I mean, it was that shocking to have a woman stand up and speak. It was the first right that they really had to get before they could do anything at all, have people listen to them. So, I mean, their biggest skill was petitioning because they were allowed to petition and nobody could stop them from that. But certainly they couldn't vote, they couldn't serve on juries. The most tragic thing is they couldn't have custody of their children. They didn't own anything, not even the clothes on their back. They owned absolutely nothing. If they were married, their husbands owned everything. And often, even if they weren't married, their brothers or their fathers owned everything. So I guess when Roz asked, have they come a long way? I mean, they've come a long way in the ways that were so profoundly central to them that they just had no rights, and they won those rights.
Can I ask one last question on my part? Suzanne, offhand, do you remember the year when Black women received the right to vote? They did not get the right to vote with the 20th Amendment, but they got it much later.
They say
And
1965, the Voting Rights Act. If you
what
had
was that?
Yep.
Okay, all
Correct.
right.
1965, when they really felt secure in their voting rights. And even now, I mean, we know how crazy it is, but yeah, so that's 45 years later.
Right, right. And it's interesting because the whole movement began from women who were abolitionists.
They really were. And yeah.
That it took to make that circle took that long.
Yeah. I mean, it was on the books, but it wasn't really on the books until 65.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, we thank you all very much for being with us, and thank you, Suzanne. And if anybody's interested in forming a book discussion around the book, you can let us know, and we'll see about that. I think you can purchase the book on Amazon, and if we ever get to see people in person again, maybe Suzanne would sign it, so you would have a signed copy of this book. So. But thank you all very much. And Suzanne, thank you for spending time with us this afternoon.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for inviting me.
Bye.